My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, and for the entirety of my 42 years, the universe, in my understanding, was a magnificent, intricate clockwork mechanism, governed by immutable physical laws, observable, testable, and ultimately comprehensible through the rigorous application of scientific inquiry. Faith, spirituality, the notion of a creator or any dimension beyond the material. These were constructs, human inventions born of fear, a desire for comfort in the face of the unknown, or a failure to grasp the elegant sufficiency of natural explanations. I wasn't just an atheist. I was a vocal proponent of scientific materialism, a quantum physicist whose life was dedicated to unraveling the fundamental constituents of reality, to peering into the very fabric of space-time and matter. My world was one of equations, experiments, peer-reviewed papers, and the relentless pursuit of empirical evidence. The very idea of a soul, an afterlife, or a personal deity was, to me, an absurdity, a relic of a pre-scientific age. I found beauty not in hymns or scriptures, but in the mathematics describing a quantum field, the breathtaking images from deep space telescopes, the elegant symmetry of the Standard Model. This was my cathedral, the laboratory, my place of worship, and reason my only guide. I lectured, I wrote, I debated, always with the conviction that the universe, while vast and mysterious, held no room for the supernatural. Any phenomenon that appeared to defy known science was simply a puzzle yet to be solved, a gap in our current understanding that future research would inevitably fill. There was no ghost in the machine, no divine spark, just the extraordinary dance of particles and energy. I wasn't unkind in my atheism, or so I believed. I simply saw it as a matter of intellectual honesty, a commitment to truth as revealed by evidence. Those who clung to religious beliefs, in my view, were often intelligent people who had simply compartmentalized their minds, allowing sentiment or tradition to override critical thinking in one crucial area of their lives. I felt a sort of compassionate frustration, wishing they could experience the liberation that came with accepting the universe for what it demonstrably was, without the need for ancient myths or comforting illusions. My work was demanding, consuming, but profoundly satisfying. I was at the forefront of research into quantum gravity, seeking to reconcile the two great pillars of modern physics, and I felt I was on the verge of significant breakthroughs. My life was ordered, logical, and, I believed, meaningful in its contribution to human knowledge. Yet, if I were truly honest with myself, in the rarest, most unguarded moments, perhaps staring at a particularly complex equation that hinted at something deeper, or looking up at a star-drenched night sky far from city lights, a fleeting, almost imperceptible whisper would sometimes brush against the fortress of my certainty. It wasn't a doubt in my science, not in the methodology or the findings, but a faint, unarticulated sense of something more, a resonance that the purely mechanistic view, for all its power, didn't quite capture. I would dismiss these moments swiftly, attributing them to fatigue, or the human brain's innate pattern-seeking tendencies, or perhaps a vestigial echo of the pervasive cultural narratives I had so thoroughly rejected. They were anomalies, static in the otherwise clear signal of reason, and I gave them no quarter. My identity was inextricably linked to my worldview, and any deviation felt like a betrayal of my core principles, a slip into the very intellectual sloppiness I decried in others. Life was finite, consciousness an emergent property of complex neural networks, and when the brain ceased to function, that was the end. A stark, perhaps uncomforting, but, in my view, undeniable truth. This unwavering conviction was the bedrock upon which I had built my entire existence, my career, my sense of self. I had no inkling that this bedrock was about to be subjected to a cataclysm that would not just crack it, but shatter it into a million pieces, forcing me to confront a reality far stranger and infinitely more profound than my science had ever allowed me to imagine. The universe, it turned out, had a few surprises left, and one of them was waiting for me, with an appointment I could neither predict nor avoid, an appointment that would redefine everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the very nature of existence. The day it happened began like any other, a Tuesday in late autumn, the air crisp and carrying the scent of decaying leaves. I was at the synchrotron facility, overseeing a complex experiment designed to probe the behavior of exotic particles under extreme conditions. The energy levels were unprecedented, the data streams already hinting at novel interactions. There was an undercurrent of excitement in the control room, that familiar thrill that accompanies pushing the boundaries of the known. I was deeply engrossed, monitoring a cascade of readings, my mind a whirl of calculations and interpretations. We were in the final phase of a critical test sequence, ramping up the beam intensity to its maximum tolerance. Standard safety protocols were in place, triple-checked, the system robust, or so we all believed. The first indication that something was amiss was a flicker in the primary containment field readings, a subtle oscillation where there should have been absolute stability. I remember frowning, leaning closer to the monitor, my fingers flying across the keyboard to run diagnostics. "Hold the ramp," I instructed into the comms, my voice calm, betraying none of the sudden, sharp unease that pricked at me. Before my colleague could even acknowledge the command, a high-pitched whine began to emanate from the core antechamber, a sound that was definitely not part of the operational symphony. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, bathing the control room in an infernal glow. The situation escalated with terrifying speed. Containment breach. Those two words, stark and brutal on the main display, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. Years of training kicked in. Emergency shutdown procedures initiated. Evacuation alarms sounded. But the universe, or perhaps some unforeseen flaw in our meticulous designs, had other plans. There was a deafening roar, a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the air, followed by an immense concussive force that threw me from my chair. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of noise, light, and pain. I remember a searing heat, the smell of ozone and burning electronics, the screams of my colleagues. I tried to move, to get up, but my body wouldn't respond. A crushing weight seemed to be pressing down on my chest, and each breath was a ragged, agonizing effort. Through a haze of smoke and dust, I saw twisted metal, shattered consoles, a scene of utter devastation where moments before there had been cutting-edge science. My vision began to tunnel, the edges darkening. The pain was immense, a symphony of agony, but strangely, my scientific mind was still trying to process, to analyze. Catastrophic equipment failure, uncontrolled energy release, massive trauma. The diagnosis was clinical, detached, even as my lifeblood was ebbing away. I thought of my unfinished work, the theories I wouldn't get to test, the papers I wouldn't write, a profound sense of regret, not for the life I had lived, but for the knowledge I would now never attain. There were no thoughts of an afterlife, no desperate prayers to a deity I didn't believe in, just a fading awareness, a descent into an engulfing blackness. I felt a strange coldness spread through my limbs, and the frantic sounds of the unfolding disaster grew distant, muffled, as if I were sinking underwater. My last conscious thought was a flicker of ironic curiosity. So this is it, oblivion, the final, inevitable cessation of consciousness, the grand experiment of my own existence coming to an unceremonious end. Then, nothing. The pain vanished, the noise ceased, the light extinguished, just a profound, absolute, and utterly empty void. It was the state I had always theorized death to be, the ultimate entropy of self. And for a timeless moment, that was all there was, or so it seemed. The transition was not from nothingness to something, but rather a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the quality of that nothingness. It was as if the void itself began to acquire a texture, a presence. I had no body, no senses as I understood them, yet there was an awareness, a locus of me that persisted. It was the strangest sensation, or lack thereof. I tried to orient myself, but there was no up or down, no here or there. I was simply aware. My scientific training, my ingrained skepticism, immediately began to search for an explanation. Hypoxia-induced hallucination? The last firing of a dying brain creating a phantom consciousness? I clung to these possibilities, the familiar anchors of my materialist worldview, but they felt thin, inadequate to describe this state. Then, slowly, a new perception began to form. I became aware of a scene, not through eyes, for I had none, but through a kind of direct apprehension. I saw the control room, or what was left of it. Twisted girders, smoking consoles, the frantic movements of emergency personnel in hazmat suits, and there, amidst the wreckage, lay a still form, my form. Dr. Atheist Thorne, physicist, atheist, now a casualty. I observed my own body with a bizarre sense of detachment, like a scientist studying a specimen. The injuries were clearly catastrophic. There was no sign of life. My colleagues were being attended to, some injured, others in shock. I felt a pang of something. Not quite grief, but a dispassionate sorrow for their trauma, for the abrupt end to our shared endeavor. But for the me lying on the floor, nothing. No fear, no regret for that broken vessel. It was just an object. I tried to interact, to communicate, to understand how I could be observing this if I was supposed to be extinguished. But there was no mechanism for interaction. I was a point of awareness, unbound, yet somehow connected to this unfolding drama. The calm was unnerving. My entire life, I had predicated my understanding of consciousness on the brain. Brain dies, consciousness ends. Simple, irrefutable. Yet here I was. I persisted. This was impossible by every tenet I held sacred. My mind, or whatever faculty was now processing this, raced through possibilities. A complex dream state triggered by trauma, but the clarity, the coherence, the utter lack of dreamlike absurdity, it didn't fit. This felt more real, more lucid than any waking moment I could recall. Then the scene below began to dim, to recede, as if I were drifting away, or as if its relevance was fading. The sounds of the emergency, the visual details of the destruction, all became less distinct, and into this fading perception, something new began to emerge. Not from any particular direction, but from everywhere, and from within, a light. It wasn't light as I knew it, not photons striking a retina. This was different. It was a luminosity that was also a feeling, a presence. It started as a faint glow, a distant shimmer in the pervasive dimness that had replaced the control room. But it grew, rapidly, exponentially, not in a way that blinded, but in a way that illuminated everything, including the very essence of my disembodied awareness. The light was unimaginably brilliant, yet soft, inviting, and with it came a feeling so profound, so overwhelming, that it dwarfed any emotion I had ever experienced or theorized. It was peace. A peace that passed all understanding, a peace that dissolved every vestige of scientific skepticism, every fragment of fear or confusion, and woven into that peace, permeating it, was love. Not human love, with its conditions and complexities, but a vast, unconditional, all-encompassing love that seemed to be the very fabric of this emerging reality. It was a love that knew me, accepted me, welcomed me, without judgment, without reservation. My conceptual frameworks were shattering. This was not in any textbook, not in any equation. This was something else. The light continued to expand, or perhaps I was moving towards it, the distinction irrelevant in this boundless space. It was not just something to be seen, but something to be felt, to be experienced with a totality that transcended physical senses. It was a symphony of pure existence, resonating with a harmony that made the most elegant physical laws seem like crude approximations. The peace deepened, becoming a profound stillness, a cessation of all striving, all questioning. The love intensified, washing over me in waves, dissolving the remnants of my former self, the carefully constructed identity of Dr. Atheist Thorne, the skeptic, the materialist. In its place, there was just being, pure, unadulterated, conscious being, bathed in this extraordinary effulgence. I felt an irresistible pull towards the source of this light, a yearning so profound it felt like a homecoming to a place I'd never known yet always longed for. My scientific mind, though battered and overwhelmed, still flickered with attempts to analyze, to categorize. Was this the tunnel of light reported in near-death anecdotal literature? Something I had always dismissed as oxygen-starved brain phenomena. But this experience, this reality, was so much more than those dismissive explanations could ever encompass. The sheer intelligence within the light, the palpable love, the undeniable sense of ultimate reality. These were not the products of a failing biological machine. This was an encounter with something fundamental. As I drew closer, the light seemed to take on a quality of infinite depth. It was not a flat, uniform brilliance, but a living, breathing, dynamic presence, composed of all colors and no color, of all forms and no form. It was a paradox that my intellect could not grasp, yet my essence understood perfectly. And within this immeasurable light, I began to perceive a focal point, a concentration of that love and intelligence, a being of unimaginable radiance and compassion. The very thought of a being was anathema to my lifelong convictions, yet the reality of it was undeniable, pressing upon my awareness with gentle, irrefutable force. There was no fear, only a profound sense of awe, of humility before something so vast, so utterly beyond my comprehension. The light was not just external, it began to permeate me, or rather it revealed that I was, and always had been, a part of it. The illusion of separation, so central to my earthly experience, dissolved like mist in the sun. I felt an interconnectedness with everything, a unity that was both exhilarating and deeply comforting. All the questions that had driven my scientific career, the nature of reality, the origin of the universe, the meaning of consciousness, seemed to be answered not in words or equations, but in this direct experience of the light itself. It was a knowing that bypassed the intellect, a gnosis that resonated in the very core of my being. I understood, in that moment, that the universe I had studied, the physical realm of matter and energy, was but a shadow, a reflection, an infinitesimally small part of a much grander, more magnificent reality. And that reality was, at its heart, love. This was the ultimate force, the fundamental constant, the grand unified theory I had spent my life searching for. And it wasn't to be found in a particle accelerator or a mathematical formula, but here in this radiant, loving presence. The journey into the light was a journey into the heart of existence itself, and I was being welcomed not as a stranger, but as a long-lost child returning home. The sheer intensity of this realization was enough to unmake me, to dissolve any remaining vestiges of my old self, and yet I felt more truly me than ever before. As the focal point within the light became clearer, it resolved into a distinct presence, a being of such pure, incandescent love and wisdom that my disembodied consciousness reeled with an awe that bordered on blissful annihilation. There were no physical features in the human sense, yet the impression of a face, of eyes filled with infinite compassion and an ancient, knowing smile was overwhelmingly present. And I knew, with a certainty that transcended all my previous knowledge, all my ingrained skepticism, who this was. The name formed in my awareness, not as a sound, but as a recognition, a resonance that vibrated through the very essence of what I now was. It was Jesus. The irony was not lost on me. Even in this state of profound transcendence, Dr. Atheist Thorne, the staunch atheist, face to face with the central figure of a faith I had dismissed as myth and superstition, a cosmic joke, perhaps? But there was no mockery here, only an immense, unconditional love that made my earthly conceptions of belief and disbelief seem utterly trivial. He did not speak in words, not initially, but his thoughts, his understanding, flowed into me, a direct communion of consciousness. Atheist, the name resonated within me, spoken with a tenderness that brought forth an answering wave of emotion I couldn't have named, a flood of gratitude, humility, and a sorrow for my lifelong blindness. And then, as if a veil were lifted, my life began to unfold before me, not as a series of memories, but as a panoramic, simultaneous perception of every moment, every thought, every intention, every consequence. It was my life review, but not a judgment. It was an illumination, a gentle showing. I saw my passion for science, my dedication to uncovering the truths of the physical universe. This was not condemned. In fact, there was an acknowledgement of the sincerity of that pursuit, the genuine desire to understand. But I also saw what was missing. I saw the countless times I had dismissed the possibility of anything beyond the material, the intellectual pride that had blinded me to other forms of knowing, the subtle arrogance with which I had viewed those who held spiritual beliefs. I saw moments of human connection, opportunities for love, for compassion, for empathy, that I had either undervalued or bypassed in my relentless focus on intellectual achievement. I saw the times my words, spoken with the certainty of scientific authority, had perhaps inadvertently caused pain or confusion to others, discouraging their own nascent spiritual inquiries. There was no accusation in this review, only a profound clarity. It was as if I were seeing my life through his eyes, through the lens of this infinite love, and the understanding that dawned was not of guilt, but of missed opportunities for a deeper, more holistic engagement with reality. I saw my dismissiveness of concepts like soul or spirit contrasted with the undeniable reality of my current, disembodied, yet fully conscious state. I saw my insistence on empirical evidence as the only valid path to truth, now faced with an experience that was more real, more evident, than anything my senses or instruments had ever recorded. The review wasn't about my sins in a conventional religious sense. I had striven to live ethically according to my own humanistic principles. It was about the profound limitations of the worldview I had so fiercely defended, the vast dimensions of reality I had willfully ignored or denied. The love I felt emanating from him was not diminished by this review. If anything, it deepened, as if to say, all of this was part of your journey, and all of it is understood and embraced. The overwhelming feeling was one of compassion, his compassion for my limited understanding, and a dawning compassion within myself for the self I had been. The intellectual edifice I had constructed over a lifetime, stone by logical stone, was now revealed to be a beautiful, intricate, but ultimately incomplete structure, a single room in an infinite mansion. The life review dissolved, leaving me in the presence of that radiant, loving being, Jesus. The silence that followed was not empty but filled with an unspoken understanding, a deep and resonant peace. Then his thoughts, his wisdom, began to flow into me again, not as a lecture, but as a gentle unfolding of truths that my soul seemed to recognize. As if awakening from a long amnesia, he showed me the universe, not as the cold, indifferent mechanism I had perceived, but as a living, breathing symphony of consciousness, a manifestation of divine thought and love. He showed me how the laws of physics, which I had revered as fundamental, were themselves expressions of a deeper, more sentient order. Like the brushstrokes of an infinite artist, science, he conveyed, was a valid and beautiful way of understanding the how of creation, but it could never on its own grasp the why nor the who. I saw the interconnectedness of all things, not as an abstract philosophical concept, but as a vibrant, palpable reality. Every particle, every star, every living being was woven together in an intricate tapestry of light and consciousness, and that tapestry was held together by love. My own scientific pursuits, my equations describing quantum fields and space-time curvature, were seen now as tiny glimpses into the grammar of this cosmic language, a language whose author I was now meeting. He addressed my atheism, not with rebuke, but with a profound understanding. He showed me how my quest for truth, my insistence on evidence, my rejection of dogma, were in their own way a form of spiritual seeking, even if misdirected or incomplete. He conveyed that the human intellect, while a powerful tool, could become a barrier if it did not open itself to the heart, to intuition, to the direct experience of the numinous. He showed me that consciousness was not an emergent property of matter, as I had always insisted, but rather that matter was an emergent property of consciousness, a condensation of divine energy into form. This revelation alone was enough to upend my entire scientific paradigm. The brain did not create consciousness. It was more like a receiver, a transducer, allowing a sliver of universal consciousness to experience itself within the constraints of the physical world. He spoke of purpose, not a grand preordained script, but an inherent potential within every soul to grow, to learn, to love, to contribute to the ongoing symphony of creation. My purpose, he showed me, was not just to unravel physical mysteries, but to awaken to the spiritual dimension of my own being and to help others do the same, using my unique gifts and experiences. He revealed that the perceived conflict between science and spirituality was an illusion, a product of limited human understanding. True science and true spirituality were two paths to the same ultimate reality, two languages describing the same ineffable truth. The challenge was to integrate them, to build bridges where humanity had erected walls. There were no complex theological doctrines, no talk of specific religions or rituals in the way I had understood them from my studies of earthly faiths. The message was simple, yet infinitely profound. God is love, reality is consciousness, and all beings are interconnected expressions of that divine source. The path to salvation, if one could use that word, was not through adherence to a particular creed, but through the awakening of the heart, through the practice of unconditional love, compassion, and the relentless pursuit of truth in all its forms, physical, intellectual, and spiritual. Each revelation landed not as an intellectual concept to be debated, but as a direct experiential knowing, a truth that resonated with an unshakable certainty deep within my core. My mind, the scientist's mind, was simultaneously shattered and expanded, broken open to a reality vaster and more wondrous than I could ever have conceived. As these profound truths settled into my awareness, the radiant presence of Jesus gently guided my perception towards new vistas. He showed me what could be described as heaven, though the word itself felt inadequate, a pale human term for an ineffable reality. It was not a place of clouds and harps, as popular imagination might conceive, but a realm of pure, unfiltered consciousness, a dimension of infinite light, love, and boundless creativity. Here, souls existed in a state of blissful unity, interconnected webs of light and awareness, each unique yet part of a harmonious whole. Knowledge was not acquired through laborious study, but absorbed directly, a constant unfolding of understanding. Communication was telepathic, instantaneous, a perfect sharing of thought and feeling. There was no sense of limitation, no sorrow, no fear, only an eternal, joyful expansion into ever greater states of being and awareness. I saw that this realm was not some distant, unattainable reward, but the true home of all consciousness, the underlying reality from which we all originated, and to which we would all ultimately return. It was a state of being, more than a place. Then, with infinite gentleness, he allowed me to perceive another aspect of reality, not as a punishment or a threat, but as a consequence of choice, of turning away from the light. It wasn't a fiery hell of torment in the traditional sense, but rather a state of profound separation, of self-imposed darkness. Here, souls who had chosen to live in fear, in selfishness, in hatred, or in the willful denial of their spiritual nature, experienced the desolation of being cut off from the universal love and light. It was a realm of deep regret, of loneliness, of confusion, where the illusions and attachments of earthly life were seen for what they were, yet the soul felt trapped by its own patterns of thought and behavior. The suffering here was not inflicted by an angry deity, but was the natural outcome of spiritual disharmony, the pain of being disconnected from one's true self, and from the source of all being. It was a place of profound spiritual poverty, a stark contrast to the infinite richness of heaven. He conveyed that even these souls were not eternally damned or forgotten. The love of the divine permeated all existence, and the possibility of turning back towards the light, of healing and redemption, was always present, though the journey from such deep darkness could be long and arduous. This understanding was not presented to inspire fear, but to highlight the profound importance of our choices, the responsibility we each have for our spiritual evolution. Then, his focus returned to me, his love enveloping me like a comforting embrace. Eris, his thought resonated. Your time in the physical realm is not yet complete. There are those you must reach, truths you must share. You chose a life of scientific inquiry, seeking to understand the mechanisms of the universe. Now you have glimpsed its heart, its soul. You must return and build a bridge between these two worlds of understanding. Tell them that science and spirit are not enemies, but partners in the quest for ultimate truth. Tell them that love is the fundamental force, that consciousness is eternal, and that they are infinitely more than the physical bodies they inhabit. The commission was clear, its weight immense. Me, the skeptic, the atheist, to be a messenger of spiritual truth, the thought was overwhelming. But how? I projected. A wave of doubt and inadequacy washing over me. They will not believe me. My colleagues, my peers, they will think I have lost my mind. His response was calm, reassuring. Speak your truth with love and humility. The seeds you plant will find fertile ground in hearts that are ready to awaken. Do not be concerned with the outcome, only with the sincerity of your sharing. You will not be alone. I will be with you. The light around us seemed to intensify, pulsing with an energy that was both gentle and powerful. The mission felt impossible, yet the love and assurance I received made me feel that somehow it could be done. The understanding was clear. My near death was not an end, but a new beginning, a pivot point from which my life's trajectory would be irrevocably altered. The return was like being sucked backward through a rapidly constricting tunnel, the infinite light and peace receding with astonishing speed, replaced by a growing sense of weight, of pressure, of confinement. The first sensation was an agonizing gasp for air, my lungs burning as if filled with fire. Then came the pain, a brutal, overwhelming flood of physical agony that ripped through me, a stark contrast to the blissful transcendence I had just experienced. I was aware of frantic voices, the beeping of machinery, the chaotic sounds of an emergency room. My eyes fluttered open, or at least I think they did. The harsh, sterile lights above were blinding, searing. "We've got a pulse," someone shouted, the voice tinny and distant. "Blood pressure stabilizing." Another voice, closer now. "Dr. Thorne, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." I tried to respond, to make some sign, but my body felt like a leaden, unresponsive shell. The memories of the light, of Jesus, of the profound truths I had witnessed, were still vividly, searingly present in my mind. A vibrant inner reality starkly at odds with the crude, painful sensations of my physical form. The disconnect was jarring, disorienting. How could that be real, and this also be real? My scientific mind, the one I thought had been unmade and remade, struggled to reconcile the two. Was the NDE a hallucination, a complex neurochemical event triggered by massive trauma and oxygen deprivation, as my old self would have vehemently argued? But the experience had possessed a lucidity, a coherence, a profound sense of ultimate reality that no dream or hallucination could ever mimic. It felt more real than the hospital room, more real than the pain now coursing through my nerves. Over the next few days, as I drifted in and out of consciousness in the intensive care unit, this internal battle raged. My body was broken, but the physicians were marveling at my survival. "A miracle," one of them had whispered to a nurse, a word that now carried a completely new resonance for me. My colleagues from the lab visited, their faces a mixture of relief and grave concern. They spoke of the accident, the investigation, the heroics of the rescue teams. I listened, nodded, but my thoughts were elsewhere, replaying the visions, the words, the overwhelming love. How could I ever explain it to them? How could I, Dr. Atheist Thorne, the champion of empirical evidence, tell them I had met Jesus and been shown the secrets of the universe? The very idea seemed preposterous, even to a part of me that was still reeling. The struggle was intense. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, to file it away as an anomaly, a product of a traumatized brain. That would be the easy path, the path back to my old life, my old certainties. But the truth of the experience, its profound impact on my very core, was undeniable. It had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. The old heiress, the dogmatic atheist, felt like a distant memory, a photograph of someone I used to know. This new heiress was filled with a sense of awe, of humility, and an urgent, almost unbearable need to understand and integrate what had happened. I began to tentatively piece together the implications. If what I experienced was real, then my entire understanding of existence was flawed. Consciousness was not a byproduct of the brain, it was fundamental. Love was not just an emotion, it was a cosmic force. Death was not an end, it was a transition. These were not hypotheses to be tested, they were experienced truths. The commission I had been given, to build a bridge between science and spirit, felt like an impossibly daunting task, yet it also resonated with a deep sense of purpose, a sense that my life's work, my scientific training, had somehow been a preparation for this, albeit in a way I could never have anticipated. The old certainties were gone, replaced by a vast, luminous uncertainty, an openness to a reality far grander and more mysterious than I had ever allowed myself to believe. The weeks turned into months. My physical recovery was slow, arduous, marked by relentless pain and frustrating limitations. But the internal journey was even more challenging. The memory of the NDE remained as vivid and transformative as ever, a constant, luminous presence in my consciousness. Sharing it, however, proved to be an exercise in profound vulnerability and often deep disappointment. I first tried to articulate my experience to my closest scientific colleagues, individuals I had known and respected for years, with whom I had shared countless hours debating the intricacies of the cosmos. I chose my words carefully, attempting to frame the NDE in terms that might resonate with their empirical mindset, speaking of altered states of consciousness, of perceptions that transcended normal sensory input. Their reactions ranged from polite, concerned skepticism to outright dismissal. "Aris, you went through a horrific trauma," one said gently. "The brain does strange things when it's deprived of oxygen. It's a well-documented phenomenon." Another was less charitable. "You're talking about hallucinations, Thorne. We're scientists. Let's stick to what's verifiable." The chasm between my experience and their framework of understanding felt impossibly wide. My carefully constructed reputation as a rigorous, rational, evidence-based physicist began to crumble. Whispers followed me. "Dr. Thorne's not quite herself since the accident. She's had some sort of breakdown. Funding for my previous research projects dried up. Invitations to speak at conferences dwindled. The academic world, my world, was subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, ostracizing me." The pain of this rejection was acute, not just professionally, but personally. These were people I had considered intellectual kin. Yet, the truth of what I had seen, the love I had felt, the commission I had received, these were non-negotiable realities for me now. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I couldn't unknow what I now knew. I started writing, not scientific papers, but a personal account of my experience, struggling to find language adequate to convey the ineffable. It was a cathartic process, a way of trying to make sense of the collision between my old life and this new, astonishing reality. I delved into literature I had previously dismissed: philosophy, mysticism, the sacred texts of various traditions, and, yes, accounts of other NDEs. I found echoes of my own experience in the words of others, people from vastly different backgrounds, cultures, and belief systems, all describing similar core elements: the light, the overwhelming love, the life review, the encounter with a divine presence. This provided a strange sort of comfort, a sense that I was not alone in this extraordinary journey, even if my immediate peers couldn't comprehend it. My relationship with science itself began to transform. I didn't reject its methods or its findings regarding the physical world, but I now saw it as only one piece of a much larger puzzle, a tool for exploring one dimension of a multidimensional reality. The dogmatic materialism that had once defined me was replaced by a profound sense of awe and mystery, an understanding that the universe was far more sentient, far more interconnected, and far more purposeful than my equations had ever suggested. The commission from Jesus to build a bridge became my guiding principle. How could I use my scientific understanding, my credibility, what was left of it, to speak to a world that, like my former self, was often closed off to anything beyond the material? It felt like trying to describe color to someone born blind. Yet I had to try. The peace I had experienced in that light, the unconditional love, it was not just for me. It was a universal truth, a promise available to everyone. My old life was over. That much was clear. A new, uncertain, but profoundly meaningful path was unfolding before me. A path that required a courage I hadn't known I possessed. The old certainties had crumbled, but in their place, a new foundation was slowly, painstakingly being laid. It was a foundation built not on equations or empirical data alone, but on the undeniable experiential truth of that encounter with the light, with Jesus, with a love that transcended all understanding. My scientific training, however, was not abandoned. It was repurposed. I began to explore the frontiers, where science and spirituality seemed to converge, the mysteries of consciousness, the implications of quantum physics for our understanding of reality, the study of phenomena that defied purely materialistic explanations. I sought out others who were walking similar paths: scientists, philosophers, theologians, and ordinary individuals who had experienced profound spiritual awakenings. I found a small but growing community of open-minded seekers, people who were not afraid to ask the big questions and to look for answers beyond the confines of established dogma, whether scientific or religious. Sharing my story with these individuals was a profoundly different experience. There was understanding, resonance, a shared sense of wonder. Here, I wasn't Dr. Thorne, the physicist who had lost it, but Eris, a fellow traveler on an extraordinary journey. The professional isolation was still painful, the loss of my former standing in the scientific community a constant ache. But it was gradually being supplanted by a new sense of belonging, a connection to a different kind of fellowship. I started to speak publicly, not at prestigious scientific conferences, but in smaller, more intimate settings. Community centers, interfaith gatherings, online forums dedicated to consciousness studies and NDEs. I learned to articulate my experience in a way that honored its sacredness, while also acknowledging the intellectual frameworks of my audience. I spoke of the limits of science, not to denigrate it, but to invite a broader, more inclusive vision of reality. I shared how my encounter had not made me abandon reason, but had expanded it, opening it to dimensions of knowing that went beyond the purely analytical. The message was always the same. We are more than our physical bodies. Consciousness is eternal. Love is the fundamental fabric of existence, and there is a benevolent, loving intelligence at the heart of the cosmos. The commission to build a bridge became the central theme of my new life. I wrote a book, not a scientific treatise, but a deeply personal account of my journey from staunch atheism to profound spiritual insight. It was an act of supreme vulnerability, laying bare my innermost experiences and my radical transformation for the world to scrutinize. The reaction was, as expected, mixed. Many in the scientific establishment dismissed it as anecdotal, subjective, the product of a traumatized mind. But from others, from countless ordinary people around the world, came an outpouring of gratitude, of recognition, of shared longing. People wrote to me, sharing their own unexplained experiences, their quiet doubts about the purely materialistic worldview, their hunger for a more meaningful, more connected existence. It was these connections that sustained me. I realized that my experience, while unique to me, touched upon universal human questions, universal human yearnings. The profound peace I had found, the unconditional love I had experienced, was not some exclusive revelation. It was a glimpse of our shared spiritual heritage. My life was no longer about seeking accolades or publishing in prestigious journals. It was about planting seeds, about opening minds, about comforting hearts, about testifying to a reality that had been revealed to me in the most unexpected and dramatic way. The journey was far from easy. There were days of doubt, of loneliness, of frustration at the slow pace of change in a world still largely dominated by materialistic paradigms. But then I would remember the light, the love, the clear, unwavering voice of Jesus, and my resolve would be renewed. I had been given a second chance, a precious gift, and a sacred mission, and I would dedicate the rest of my days, however many were granted to me, to fulfilling it, to sharing the astonishing, life-altering message that there is infinitely more to us and to the universe than we have ever dared to dream. The scientist in me still valued evidence, but I now understood that some evidence is not found in a laboratory, but written on the human heart, revealed in moments of transcendent grace. And that, perhaps, was the most profound discovery of all.